Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really mind-bending thesis from author Andy Larson. We're going to see how he uses the massive cross-cultural phenomenon of near-death experiences, NDEs, to completely flip traditional theology on its head. It's an incredibly bold approach. He's asking us to look at thousands of these reported experiences from the absolute threshold of death, not as some rigid religious dogma, but as a rock-solid, compelling data set. So let's just jump right in.
What we're actually looking at today is an impartial investigation into Larson's book, God's Plan is Free Will. And honestly, the sheer volume of accounts he compiles is just staggering. We're talking about Larson examining millions of accounts from people who've technically died, crossed over, and then been resuscitated. And what he uncovers from all this? A surprisingly unified data set about divine purpose. The data points to a universe that isn't some cosmic courtroom, but literally a school for soul growth, and it's governed fundamentally by free will.
Now, to really grasp why this idea is so totally disruptive, we kind of have to look back at history. For centuries, brilliant ancient thinkers like Augustine and John Calvin tangled with this massive paradox. They asked, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful, how on earth can a loving God allow sin? And even more than that, can genuine free will even exist if God already knows exactly what we're going to do? They literally built entire theological systems trying to crack that puzzle. But Larson asked a fantastic question. What if they were just debating the totally wrong question simply because they didn't have the data that we have today?
And that brings us to a huge paradigm shift. See, traditional theology, especially Calvinism, leans heavily into predestination. That's the idea that God's plan determines every single choice, kind of like a predetermined divine script. But Larson's thesis completely flips the script. Based on the NDE evidence, he argues that God's omnipotence is actually expressed by creating a universe robust enough to allow genuine, uncoerced freedom. The plan isn't a scripture forced to read. The plan is that your choices actually genuinely matter.
So what actually is this evidence? Well, Larson frames these cross-cultural NDE reports as a massive, convergent, phenomenological data set. Basically, it's a huge collection of shared human experiences that are strikingly consistent, no matter the time period or geography. Ancient theologians just didn't have access to this stuff. Whether the person is a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, or a staunch atheist, the core features of the transition are exactly the same. They report moving through a tunnel, feeling this profound, overwhelming peace, meeting a loving presence, going through a life review, and then ultimately returning to their body.
Let's actually focus on that life review for a second because it is profoundly moving. In these reports, the life review is absolutely not a linear slideshow where an angry God sits up on a throne to hand down a sentence. Instead, it's this incredibly empathetic experiential process. The soul literally feels the exact pain or joy they caused others, completely from the other person's perspective. There is zero divine condemnation. Like one experiencer said, there was no judgment, I judged myself. The presiding beings just radiate unconditional love and simply ask, what did you learn?
And this perfectly illustrates another wildly common theme in these accounts, which is the pre-birth planning hypothesis. A lot of NDEers report that before even being born, souls intentionally pick out their earthly circumstances to optimize real, authentic learning. There's this one fascinating account Larson shares, where a soul wanted to be born as the absolute most handsome, intelligent man on earth. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But a council of elders actually advised them that doing that might lead to conceit and a total lack of struggle. And struggle is exactly where real learning happens. So the soul voluntarily chose modest looks and average intelligence instead. It really makes you think that the challenges we face might actually be the exact curriculum we literally signed up for.
When we put these two frameworks side by side, the contrast is just staggering. The traditional model tells us that humanity fell from perfection, that Earth is this harsh testing ground and salvation is basically a rescue mission from a primordial catastrophe, original sin. But the NDE model, which comes straight from these thousands of reports, says something completely different. It says souls voluntarily enter this life, that Earth is a purposefully designed learning environment, and the ultimate goal isn't to be rescued, but to grow. It completely removes the entire premise of inherited guilt.
Now, if you're a critical thinker, you're probably asking, well, what about hell? What about the terrifying NDEs? Larson does acknowledge that a minority of NDEs, maybe around 10 to 20%, do involve distressing elements, things like dark voids or menacing presences. So how in the world does that fit into a framework that's supposedly governed entirely by unconditional love and learning?
The key difference here is all about permanence.
Classical theology, again, especially the Calvinist view, presents hell as a permanent state where the damned have a completely fixed will, meaning they cannot choose to leave. But the distressing NDE pattern Larson identified consistently contradicts this idea. It actually presents a temporary state with a built-in voluntary exit clause. In pretty much every distressing NDE report, the darkness immediately ceases the exact moment the experiencer voluntarily reaches out for love or light or literally just asks for help.
So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that the direction of your will changes your environment. Even in the very darkest reported states, like the famous case of Howard Storm, who experienced an absolutely terrifying void before converting, the soul's agency is never, ever revoked. The environment simply mirrors their internal state until they make the choice to do something differently. According to Larson's research, God does not imprison souls. Free will isn't just some secondary feature, it's the actual structural mechanism that runs the entire afterlife.
This massive reliance on free will brings us right back to that old paradox we talked about earlier. If God knows the future, how can we possibly be free? Well, NDEs offer a seriously mind-bending answer by completely redefining time. In these reports, time operates totally outside of our normal earthly sequence. It's described as an eternal now. Larson cites an incredible account of an accident victim who, in the literal half-second he was flying through the air, had an NDE where he played for hours with a boy who actually turned out to be his future son. If past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, that old paradox of divine foreknowledge is completely irrelevant. God doesn't predict the future. God is simply present in an eternal now, just observing our free choices without ever forcing them.
As we sift through this immense volume of data, we also really need to look at what is missing. The power of silence here is absolutely staggering. Across thousands of independent accounts, there is a complete and total absence of institutional theology. Nobody reports being judged on original sin or any kind of inherited guilt. There's zero denominational superiority. Christians, Muslims, atheists, they all report the exact same loving presence. There is no divine wrath, no terrifying armies of external demons, and absolutely no requirement for institutional religious rituals. This massive, consistent silence across millions of reports is incredibly powerful negative evidence against human-made religious structures.
Just to be clear, though, Larson doesn't just dismiss religious practices as falsehoods. Not at all. Instead, he describes them as temporary scaffolding, or almost like earthly training wheels. They are simply tools designed to help our human minds focus on love while we're kind of trapped inside these physical brains. But when a soul actually leaves the body and experiences direct, unfiltered unity with the light, well, those training wheels just naturally fall away because you've reached the actual building.
And this brings us right to the ultimate conclusion of Larson's entire thesis. If we take this massive dataset of near-death experiences seriously, Larson argues we have to completely reframe how we view human existence. Under this NDE model, humanity is not some race of fallen beings living under a curse. We are absolutely not sinners just sitting around waiting for a judge's sentence in some cosmic courtroom. Instead, we are students. We're engaged in a beautifully designed, completely non-coursed curriculum of love, responsibility, and deep experiential learning.
Which leaves us with a really profound, lingering question to wrap up this explainer. If we are indeed students and not defendants, and if free will really is the true structural mechanism of reality, where even God refuses to intervene and override our choices, then what exactly is our responsibility to each other? If love simply cannot be forced and real growth requires authentic, tough challenges, how does knowing all of this change the way you treat the people around you today? It's an absolutely incredible shift in perspective to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep asking questions.